Now, good afternoon and welcome back to PGVIM International Symposium, the sixth day. And thank you for still staying with us, and thank you for all the keynotes who are joining us this afternoon. We have a very lucky day that we have all the key figures that related to Southeast Asian music composition scenes for the last 10 years, for the last even more than a decade. And we the first professors almost need no introduction. He's actually a co-founder of the PGVIM International Symposium since the year 2014, Professor Mack, who's also a vice president of Musikhochschule Lübeck, and he's a very active figure who actually has been helping us in driving ASEAN Youth Ensemble into a really interesting direction we are now at the moment. So now please let me introduce and welcome Professor Mack for his talk, Is the Virtual Real?
Okay, thank you very much, Anatai. Actually, I think it's important to take Is the Virtual Real as the subtitle, as the overall title was Music Communities in the 21st Century. And in fact, I tried to refer to both aspects. And please allow me that my focus today will be more general on issues that accompany these two terms. And therefore, I have divided my thoughts in three parts. And I must apologize, normally I really try to support everything with music examples. Today, I don't have music examples. It'll be a little more philosophical, maybe. Part one, identity in the time of hyperculture and cultural essentialism. Part two, about human coordinate systems and tolerance. And part three, is the virtual real, digital contra analog. Part one, already in 2005, the German philosopher Harry Lehmann published a remarkable article with the title Globalization and the Freedom of Arts. The author tried to define globalization as an inevitable historical process and dwelled on the importance of the development of functional systems and communities without borders. In other words, globalization has less to do with the change of territorial borders, but rather with the exponentially growing development of interest groups and interest communities. He called them the hidden agents of globalization. Consequently, he comes to an interesting conclusion. Quote, during the last time we could recognize a kind of flashback towards one's own local region. This is not an anti-movement to globalization, but its complementary side effect. End of the quote. Lehmann argues positively that the new global societies penetrate each other, and he argues negatively that regional local resources could be more exploited in a more efficient way by those global players, or as he called them, the hidden agents. On the other hand, at the same time, the local flashback is a necessary supplementary counterforce in the sense of self-preservation. Recently, the sociologist Andreas Reckwitz has put it in a more polarizing, though also threatening way, when he talks about the actual cultural conflicts that are less than the fights between cultural realms a la Samuel Huntington. He reveals two rather opposing attitudes in dealing with culture itself. For him, there's a so-called hyperculture on one side, which fosters individualistic self-development in a form of diversity within the global markets. On the other side, he speaks of a cultural essentialism as a medium for a collective identity of communities. These communities are less related to locations, but rather based on defined limiting ideologies, whether philosophical, religious, or economic ones. Please keep both in mind because I return very often to these two aspects. According to my opinion, both statements should be slightly extended. It seems to be completely utopian to believe that the human being of today is suited for a world society that increasingly permeates and interconnects with each other, although mostly on virtual platforms. Apparently, there is, in fact, a genuine interest, if not urgent need, for the local terrain. It has to do with personal identification or identity, which conveys stability and life security, especially because of mostly alienated working situations. The search for orientation, fixed points of orientation, and the kind of counseling in the sense of balancing seems to gain new evidence. If one continues such thoughts, one may perhaps touch certain fundamental fears that humankind has tried to conquer since its beginnings. Therefore, it might be surprising that in an area of rationalization and scientific explanations, speculative life ideologies or religions of any kind still had a surprising success and intake. Some years ago, I received the news that some American states tried to implement a new legislation that the term evolution should be banned from school books. This is less surprising, though absurd and frightening at the same time. For many people, identity is not only assured by a strong self-consciousness, but also via a dialectic polarization of the self towards one's own environment, including various enemy images. Only by the latter, many people are able to accept their own selves. Although for me, such a method is nothing more like a self-triggered pastoral fata morgana that automatically impedes or at least reduces tolerance. Once again, it does not need Samuel Huntington's clash of cultures. The whole system of human coordinate systems or systems of values has become slightly into disorder. Therefore, it seems to be less important when a well-known global power wants to impose their fatal ideology with messianic zeal and cunning mendacity. But it's equally less important if a bunch of wrong-guided suicides still praise the accidental deaths of ill-known family members and declare them all as martyrs on the way to a heavenly paradise or whatever. Such perfidies are not measurable anymore, but in a frightening way, they mark our everyday life, although there are much more important things to do and to take care of, because they have to do with the future of all humankind and not only a few. In other words, Reckwit's idea of cultural essentialism, and this is the background of these two examples, seems typical for areas in a certain disorder, but cannot really help to solve the problems. COVID-19, at least, could be regarded as a regulative to rethink about who we really are, how we need each other, and how tolerance is perhaps the starting point for any kind of communication, the real as well as the virtual one, between communities of that cultural essentialism or between individuals of Reckwit's so-called hyperculture. Part 2, about human coordinate systems and tolerance. The arts, as well as an expression or even as a mirror of society processes, have to deal with such crude thoughts, although we would have to add individualism to globalism and regionalism, or the local, whatever you call it. However, exactly here it becomes difficult, because the existing points of orientation as parametrical determination seem to vanish increasingly. Lehmann, this philosopher, calls these points of orientation Archimedic points, in a kind of analogy to that famous saying of Archimedes. They are essential for life orientation of most humans, and the lack of them, now getting back to arts, represents a significant feature of postmodernism. By that, and with the words of Lehmann, the central feature of arts, the subject-object relation, vanishes. Consequently, it would be the end of the artist and the artwork as well. But at the same time, we would face the highest degree of mutual tolerance. Art education could be reduced to any kind of creative activity, and the result is more important than the result. Or the other way around, through this kind of anarchic and open sound production, I can hardly call it art, we could experience tolerance as anything goes as long as the own activity does not interfere with those from others. A paradise-like situation? I strongly doubt it. I would like to propose another model like the one from Lehman, or at least I would like to extend it again. In fact, later in his article, Lehman completely dismisses postmodern anything goes mentality. For him, an artistic decision is always depending dialectically on those points of reference and therefore correlates with the common notion of the need of such systems for the respective societies or communities as well. One may even ask whether in art music has ever existed such a kind of postmodern attitude without coordinate systems. Serious artists will always newly create their coordinate systems. The negative notion in postmodernism, at least in music, should then be based on another argument, which is the lack of critical self-reflection on the search of one's own coordinate systems. However, if we talk about those coordinate systems as something trans-individual, then its lack might be really something essential. Nevertheless, there are other positions like that, one from, for example, Jonathan D. Kramer, who insists that there are certainly coordinate systems in postmodernism. According to Kramer, all coordinate systems are systematically questioned, but never denied. Therefore, postmodernism has never been a stylistic epoch, but rather an attitude. And here I would completely agree, because this is a basic prerequisite in arts and a strong argument as well, why a broad palette of art education may support the notion of not only tolerance, but also acceptance in an educational situation. However, we all know how extremely far, especially today's music education, is away from those goals. When will educators learn that knowledge of facts has nothing to do with art education? It even impedes the development of tolerance. That tiny glimpse of knowledge that can be taught in a school situation is too limited. If a pupil automatically takes it as a pass pro toto, we have just started to implant the seed of intolerance. As a first summary, we can say that we face a dilemma if we try to bring art and society together. If we regard the human desire for those archimedes points of orientation, Lehman says, as important, whether in art, everyday life, or whatever, then it is quite counterproductive in today's global world. The degree of acceptance of the other, of the alien, will disappear in favor for the own self-preservation. The idea of an open or flexible coordinate system, or the non-existence of it at all, will remain utopian. Here, I still miss a comprehensive answer from Andreas Reckwitz, because coordinate systems or archimedes points are typical for communities of that cultural essentialism, but also it happens with individuals of the hyperculture. I think the last months have given us some good examples during the Corona crisis. The more we became aware that we really do not know what the cause is or what the remedy is, what the best behavior would be, etc., the more spiritual theories of any kind became popular. New communities, in the sense of Reckwitz, cultural essentialism, with strict archimedes points develop. And as real human communication has been interrupted temporarily, social platforms have replaced it. The virtual almost or partly became reality. People are frightened that they do not receive precise and comprehensive arguments, even if they would be wrong. They need their kind of remedy, their coordinate system of understanding. The simple fact that there is something that we really cannot explain for a while makes people anxious. Even religion or its representatives can hardly give satisfying answers, except some extremists who certainly always accuse any other party of being responsible for it. The peak of religiously motivated irrationalism is the following, and this was poor reality in last March. Vice Minister of a Southeast Asian country announced in public, COVID-19 is only a disease for people with the wrong belief. And if you have the right one, nothing will happen to you. End of the quote. Here, I would like to get back to my own approach in that big ocean of opinions and ideologies. I am convinced that the ability to make artistic decisions must not necessarily be related or being based on points of reference without falling into the trap of a postmodern aesthetic of indifference. By that, I strongly support the idea of Reckwit's hyperculture and its implicit but tolerant individualism. One may refer to a so-called koan in Japanese Zen Buddhism. A koan is a special problem which, because of its implicit contradiction, cannot be grasped rationally. Only an encompassing occupation with it may ultimately lead to a kind of transcending effect which goes beyond that contradiction. But this can only be experienced individually. It can be easily compared with artistic decision processes, far away from traditional dialectic processes, and certainly also far away from postmodern dissolution tendencies of any kind. A statement by French symbolist Stéphane Mallarmé has always been my guideline in this regard. Quote, I have created my work only by elimination, and each truth that I have gained has been coming out of the loss of an impression that has destroyed itself in the very moment of its appearance, and which, because of the freed darkness, allowed me to get deeper into the feeling of the absolute darkness. End of the quote. The quote, that can be hardly accused of being written with a postmodernist attitude, also fosters the lack of archimetic points without losing orientation or falling into the trap of total subjectivity, as Lehmann would name it. Especially that last term by Lehmann, total subjectivity, seems to be questionable. For Lehmann, it implies the complete lack of criteria and therefore the lack of freedom for a decision in the cauldron of arbitrariness. However, I think that term total subjectivity can be seen the other way around as well. It is the radical demand for self-responsibility which develops only out of the thing itself. Like with Mallarmé, who had to give up himself, raising up to the experience of a new kind of objectivity, of radical subjectivity, strange word, but I think it's, I want to repeat again, the objectivity of radical subjectivity during an artistic process. Such a process cannot be foreseen. One has always to jump into the black hole or the cold water, knowing that it's only oneself who experiences it and who has to carry all related consequences. Let me finish this second part on artistic responsibility and tolerance with a second summary. We have seen that individual freedom on the one side, hyperculture, and total integration into a coordinate system of a community, cultural essentialism, are both extremes that tend to impede openness or tolerance. It is clear and essential for the second type, but complete individual freedom potentially also lacks self-responsibility. Individual freedom can only go so far as the freedom of others is not touched or limited. Here, tolerance is a crucial term. Here, I just want to put in something into brackets. This is at the moment a very big discussion in Germany regarding the anti-corona demonstrations, which were just forbidden in Berlin because people said it's too dangerous for other people. So here is really the conflict between the freedom of demonstration and also the freedom of the others who want to stay healthy. That's a very interesting point at the moment. We can cultivate such kind of tolerance in learning to make artistic decisions with the full self-responsibility. By the way, Stravinsky once claimed that artistically he has the utmost freedom after clear limitation at first. Then the creative challenge comes into being and leads us through a complex process, always critically weighing things with others. It's an exhausting process and a never-ending one as well. So Requis's notion of hyperculture is basically correct to describe a tendency of our time, but then that complete availability and seemingly individualism asks for certain consequences. The total integration into coordinate systems on the other side, the cultural essentialism as a response to the fear of the cauldron of this world is understandable. But self-responsibility is often put aside in favor of mostly obscure ideologies. People give their lives and souls and thoughts into the hands of populists, ideologies, and charlatans. That danger is implicit in any of the world's religions. We know that religion itself is primarily a tool to seemingly understand the non-understandable. At its best, it accepts plurality. Many years ago, a Balinese priest asked me how me, a Western Christian, because he could not think otherwise, how I could pray in their temple during a ceremony. Before I answered, he quickly gave the answer to himself, saying, sorry, this was a stupid question. If there is something beyond us, it is the same for all. We just name it differently. I think it was a wise comment, which I would love to hear more from clerics of any other religion. This brings us to a last aspect of this chapter. What can art achieve to support or strengthen that urgently needed tolerance? To give a comprehensive answer here on the background mentioned above, I see mainly 2 points regarding the field of music. First, strengthening tolerance, acceptance through music practice when playing together. I would like to start with the first and most simple point. It's a clear vote for analog reality. I explain that more extensively later in the third part. Musical practice with more than one person is already the starting point for strengthening tolerance. However, tolerance is something not enough, sometimes not enough, because this word means that one only tolerates differences without necessarily respecting them. Thus, I believe that acceptance is a step ahead of tolerance. In this case, the musical practice does not even need any knowledge of an instrument nor of a notation. It can be practiced on an improvisational level. Good improvisation, even as a duo, asks for taking care of the intentions of one's partner. In the learning process, we can start with simple exercises, just using the human voice. Player A suggests something and player B starts to react to it. Reacting can happen in various ways, from joining in until rejecting or ignoring completely. Between both extremes, lots of sub-steps and variations do exist. If the pupils still have difficulties to create organized sound as the very first step, the teacher may suggest some motifs, phrases, or sounds. In most cases, a kind of dialogue will appear. It also may happen that one person wants to be prominent and the other just accompanies. It means that the teacher should prepare an encompassing repertoire of possibilities and situations. Nothing must be longer than a minute, and after each attempt, an evaluation must take place with the players as well as with the whole class that was listening. My experience is that the very beginning is always the hardest, and the teacher must be prepared for that. Sooner or later, the pupils will get into it. It is also important that the starting musical elements do not refer to a certain defined musical language. So-called rules may develop automatically during the musical practice. Step by step, this process may include bigger groups, but not more than 5 or 6 persons. In a further step, the same games may be done with simple percussion instruments or whatever is available. It is always essential that the role playing in a group is intensively discussed. By that, tolerating or accepting something that is done by someone else and reacting to it reveals a new consciousness about otherness, responsibility, and mutual acceptance. Second point, strengthening tolerance, acceptance through intercultural music education. While the first category is also helpful to learn about sound and other musical parameters, including their meaning and function in a context, this second category has more to do with the consciousness of different cultural identities. It already takes place on that individual level if you would apply the term culture to individual behavior as well. See the term hyperculture in the first part. The question where the intercultural starts is not easy to answer. In a country like Indonesia, the whole nation is signified by a high degree of interculturality. Take a Balinese, a Sundanese, or a Batak, just to name 3 cultural realms, and the difference are more significant than between a German, a French, and a British. Especially for Indonesians, it is a basic characteristic of the nation to achieve unity in diversity. This process is an ongoing one that will never end. Here I would like again to recall the beginning of my presentation when I spoke about the mutual dependency of the global and the local. We also know how difficult it is to be accepting in relation to social behavior, religion, and social status. Here, musical experience can be a helping tool to ease ethnic tensions of any kind, accepting the otherness, but also learn from the latter. This assumption is based on the strong belief that music is always a medium that transports cultural identity and cultural memory on various levels. I must admit that looking back on my now 66 years, I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to experience diversity in an encompassing way. It has enriched my life, giving me new stimulations, and has helped me to watch or even scrutinize my own culture from outside. I think this was and still is a very healthy experience, though not always a pleasing one. Both practices support the building of a tolerant individuality, as well as a creative community development, and this must not necessarily happen in music only. Part 3 is the virtual real, digital contra analog. Let me finally come to some current debates that have been even pushed to the foreground because of their surprising timeliness. If the organizers of this symposium had formulated the slogan question, "Is the virtual real?" I would like to connect the 2 words with 2 others: virtual, digital, and real, analog. I admit that this relationship is not 100% perfect, sorry. But it might be a good starting point to rethink the issue in music. By its very nature, music, or better music performance, was always an analog and irreversible product based on the communication between performer and audience. The singularity of every performance gave that art form its special character and also its uniqueness. The situation, so to speak, also defined the kind of a social contract between performer and audience, which we both consider as 2 communities that are spontaneously created in the moment of a performance. And even these 2 communities are tied together by the music work. The only difference is that one community plays while the other listens to the composition. But real listening is also a creative activity and asks for intentional efforts. And it is the crucial point that also separates entertainment from art. But I don't discuss this issue now, just I think here it's a very important thing. The first paradigmatic change of this situation was discussed extensively by Walter Benjamin in his groundbreaking article, "The Artwork in the Era of Reproduction Technology." This is from 1933, by the way. Quote, "What becomes stunned in the era of technical reproduction of the artwork is its aura. The process is symptomatic. Its importance goes far beyond art itself. One could say generally that the reproduction technology detaches the reproduced from its tradition. By multiplying the reproduction, that technology exchanges the unique one with the masses. The question about what is real or the original does not make sense anymore. But when the measuring standard regarding the real or the original in art production fails, the whole social function of arts has changed. Before, the artwork was a kind of ritual. The new realm is mere policy. I think it's a fabulous quote, and it's, please remind, it's from 33. Yeah? I wonder what Benjamin would say about today's situation, by the way. Apparently, there is an implicit tendency of mankind to use technology to imitate the human as close as possible. Also, we all know that cannot happen. Already in 1905, the Freiburg-based Welter company had constructed the Welter Mignon piano. The real-time live piano playing of some time could be stored on a paper roll, including articulation and dynamics. And then the paper roll could be replayed at any time as often as necessary. From that early reproduction technology until today's digitalization in the 21st century, it is a big story of numerous attempts to imitate, store, and reproduce things. The Vienna Music Library even enables the use of originally recorded sounds of music instruments to be put together digitally, that it almost sounds like live playing orchestra. The real becomes virtual, and then the virtual becomes a new reality. I do not deny that these achievements are fascinating, and they may be of some use for mass music production or any kind of functional music, but nothing more. Because what Walter Benjamin called the aura is completely obsolete here. Nevertheless, it is also evident that even during this era of reproduction, we still have a functioning and active music scene. The change of perception paradigms, and Walter Benjamin predicted it, has taken place step by step, and the real and the virtual have been blended into each other in a kind of insidious way without us noticing it. It is only today, during the Corona crisis, that we become aware of that duality, the real reality, the aura of a live performance, and the virtual reality of digital media, because live performance have been impossible, at least for a while. And we still do not know whether we may get back to all those previous forms of live concerts. Let me give you some examples of that insidious hidden change that happened parallel to live performances. After the Welter Mignon technology and some other and similar reproduction technologies, it was first the wax cylinder and then the shellac disc with the primitive recording technology that only allowed direct recordings. So if something was wrong, one had to repeat the whole thing. It was even limited to more or less 3 minutes, 50 seconds for each take. Seen from that point of view, the reproduction still represented the real in a decent way, and it did not change for quite a long time. Only the recording time got longer and the material changed to vinyl. The next step to manipulate reality even more came with the tape recording technology, because now it was not necessary to repeat the whole piece. One could repeat just a short section or even a single note and then cut and glue the tape bits. So if we claim that the difference of analog reality and digital virtuality is mainly based on the mirroring of the real uniqueness of a musical performance, then even an analog vinyl recording of, for example, a piano concerto is potentially already a virtual product. The final product has never taken place in reality because of numerous cuts. It is already a virtual product. In other words, the virtual must not always be digital, and the real must not always be analog. The last step of this development is complete digitalization that enables any kind of manipulation of the real, not only in music production, but also in social contexts. Virtual platforms create virtual social interactions that become a reality for many users, or at least have a strong influence on the real social life. Apparently, we needed a Corona crisis to become more aware of such hidden changes in human life. The temporary complete absence of real interaction between humans has made us aware that digitalization has already changed our lives in a significant way. It was an interesting experiment for me to analyze how music students reacted to it. Rationally, everybody understood the need of the lockdown. But at the same time, the Corona crisis turned into a psycho crisis, because the 50th or so Zoom conference, lecture, and virtual concert could not replace the real physical interaction of humans. Let us hope that we can get back to that and consider the virtual or digital as useful tools for precisely defined functions without being mastered by the virtual. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Dieter. Wonderful talk and always serious like as you. So very learning a lot from you. Also later listen to Jonas. Okay, I will open my video cam. Yes. Hello.
Good.
Thank you very much, Dieter. That was a very important talk, actually. It really lights up the whole afternoon for us, especially. The virtual is really the notion. I think we are dealing with this delineation between the virtual and the real now only because of this lockdown, for the fact that we are not able to connect. But all our lives before, we've already been dealing with what is virtual. Even the notion of money is actually virtual. We assign exchange value to that piece of paper or that copper coin. That's already a virtual part of our life. And then if you go to traditional cultures like the Irayamangan, they have rituals where virtually they fight spirits. I mean, that is a reality and virtuality that goes hand in hand with each other. And apparently I'm with you in your last statement that hopefully we get back to the reality of being real, of putting virtual in its right place, because now I think it's ruling our lives.
I think I agree completely with you, and that's what I mean with this insidious hidden way that has already changed us. Yeah, and only by this crisis we start to become aware of it, because now we depend on it, and then that means we also becoming aware of the difference. Yeah, before people aren't aware of the difference. I still don't know whether a guy called Donald Trump still knows the difference today. I think he doesn't. And I just tried to exemplify a problem in music with this development of recording technology. I think that I became aware that this is a very good connection. That what Walter Benjamin said already in the 30s, that the reproduction technology is the starting point of this basic change. And I think it's right, even if I use a lot of CDs as well. I know the problem, but at least I know it now. Yeah.
Can I ask a question to Dieter?
Sure.
Yesterday I heard from Jose Maceta piece, Ulut Ulut. It's about the more interactive between the people was alive, not virtually performed. And those happening is more like a ritual in real life. But a virtual performance is more like a performance. But for me, my own feeling, I didn't get the communication with the spirit. I mean, this is a kind of problematic for me. Some music can be presented as a virtual platform, but some, I think we still cannot do it on this technology, with our technology. For the moment.
Can I just answer for that before anything? Yeah, thank you very much, Guillaume. Yes, I have the same feeling.
Yes.
Anyway, I have a little comment on that in my talk, so I don't want to preempt it.
But you go further on your.
Yeah, but you're welcome to comment on that too. Apparently, yes.
I have nothing to answer. I think that's more at a statement from you. Or what is your concrete question, if you want to ask me something here?
That means the technology in the West, for example, will they produce something spiritually? I mean, not not like listening, because now quite a lot of politicians, or they thought music is just a listening perspective. So they didn't think about higher than that. So if you can perform, you perform. That means the artist is still alive, but it's not real alive. So I don't know how. For example, in Southeast Asia, we have a lax technology to make this happen. But the recording company, maybe in the West, they have some kind of like 5.6 or whatever technology to make this become real. But for the normal people, I mean, especially, some policy maker, they don't think this is necessary. Even for the theater, concert house people, they don't think it's necessary. You just
first, I would slightly disagree with you that the West has a higher developed technology today than the East or the South or Southeast Asia. I think sometimes you are much more advanced than we are in this regards. That's the first thing. The second thing is that if we open the discussion about the connection between policy and music performance, we open really an immense field of things. I can say that at the moment because I'm preparing a seminar for the winter semester on music and policy, and it's really like an ocean of problems that you find when you start at this point. So please allow me not to get into that, but let me say it like that. I think especially in totalitarian systems, and even in some young democracies, music was always regarded by the politicians as a tool for their own sake. They needed it and they exploited it. And as long as it didn't disturb their system, they let the other things go. Even during the fascist period in Germany, we could detect that some music was just allowed as long as it didn't interfere with the ideology of the state. There are interesting statements by Goebbels and Hitler, which I didn't believe when I just read it in some significant books. But on the other hand, they fostered certainly music that should support their political activities, for example, represented by a national anthem, which will be a very important topic for me. Which has nothing to do with music, but much more with ideology. That's all.
To keep the we have Christoph and Max joining us here.
Hi, everyone.
Hello everyone.
I good to see you all. I just wanted to actually make a statement more than a question. First of all, very great talk. And Dieter Mack, you mentioned the thing about recordings, and I proposed for the longest time that the name of the sound engineer and sound editor should be as big written on the cover of a CD or a recording as the name of the conductor or the artist, because it's an artistic expression as well. And to the whole thing of the virtual real, for me is clear we've been living in many different realities actually throughout the entire time. And what I noticed is that even like with the movie didn't replace theater, or opera. So this, in the same way, we all now notice that we can't replace, with all this online interaction, the interpersonal connection, and a live performance is an interpersonal connection in a way different sense than online can ever create. And I think that is one of the key takeaways that I got from the last period. And so it needs to become a different medium, but not a replacing one.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just a statement.
Agreed.
I would like to add, thank you, Christoph. Actually, you know that I'm totally with you with this. But I would like to add something to what Kyung asked before, and also Dieter, what you mentioned with recordings and how this manipulates the sort of like a music reality. What I find very interesting is that today, if you do a recording, you sort of have to follow these manipulations. You have to do it. If there's no wrong, you have to change it if you want to put it out on a CD, because the expectations are so high. And that is also connected to what Kyung said. Kyung, you mentioned in the studios in Europe have this what kind of technology, and in Malaysia you don't. I think we have these expectations that this is the standard, this is what we need to be. But I sometimes think it would be maybe even nicer to have recordings where somebody just plays it through, and then if there's a mistake or a wrong note, then that's fine. Yes, Dieter.
Yeah, just my answer to you. Just want to remind you that the recording of my percussion piece was done in Singapore. That means you have the technology.
Yeah, I know very well. Yeah.
First point. Second point.
I disagree with Kyung on saying Europe is more developed than Southeast Asia. I know.
Okay. Second point. What I wanted to show in my last chapter was without any evaluation. I just wanted to show how the things had developed from complete live performance only to the first steps of recording with the Belter piano, then the wax cylinder, then the tape, and then the digital.
Yes.
And that by that, the degree of manipulation was increased. I remember a recording of our big band pieces when one of the trumpets didn't get the high note, then we just put it up digitally. That was it. Yeah. So. And I agree, we have to accept both words. It is expected today from a CD that it is like that. But on the other hand, you can also fight against it. For example, to make some advertising for myself, there was just published from my university a 3 CD set of my music. Very nice from my university. And except 2 pieces, I insisted of using live recordings with all the minors in it, because they have been more intensive, more lively. So it's even a CD, but only 2 pieces have been produced in that way with cuts. The others are all live recordings. And I'm happy to have that.
Dieter, can I make a comment at this point too?
Sure. Morning.
Good morning.
Peter, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, everybody.
And Max.
Yeah.
Good morning.
I would like to totally support what you just said, Dieter, and what Mack said. I mean, our whole series of recordings we did now during the lockdown time with Ensemble Musikfabrik, we chose to use this format of live playing. So we were in our, we had a sound engineer there. We could have edited, but our choice was during this lockdown time to have that live aspect. I think actually throughout my recordings that I listen to most are often recordings and not studio recordings. Although, of course, there is certain repertoire where this is not that easy, but in general, I'm always for the live recordings.
We also have Professor Lansky here with us. Professor Lansky, I think you typed in some comments. Would you like to say a few words?
Thanks, Anatai. Thank you, Dieter. I hope this is working, because I'm actually, I was just a webinar member, not a panelist, but so I'm on my phone. No, the thought was only just this concept of the potential, just taking those last points. And what I've been seeing more recently is this idea of manipulating details while holding on to the original reality. So the question that I'd put forward was actually, a lot of the art we start with is manipulated anyhow. It begins virtually, we're imagining it, we craft it, we transform it, we bring it to a moment of reality. And actually what I've been seeing through some of the COVID is the game plays with reality, so that a lot of it is live, but there's some gamesmanship going on, which potentially arguably enhances the reality. And I'm minded, I was producing for Albert Chu, and he did a recording last year, a couple of years ago, of Chopin and, Rachmaninoff and Tchaikovsky sonatas, each of which were about 40 minutes long. And all the takes were 40 minutes long. but the final version is a manipulation of those various realities into a future reality, I guess, which is now a past reality. But the sense that you could actually almost feel the sweat at the top of the peak after you'd been climbing for 30 minutes, rather than having just washed yourself and played that peak 5 seconds before. So I do think there's a human dimension that comes in, but I do wonder sometimes if the multiplicities of possible reality can still catch our humanness in some way. So
I would agree completely, Bernard, that human aspect is still being evolved. I didn't deny that.
Yeah,
it's
no,
just a kind of preference. And so far we have two parallel developments, and we just now became aware of the differences of these two parallel developments, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point. And I agree. I mean, I like the way you're clarifying that. But I think what's really interesting as the next phase of that will be that when the parallel lines start crossing each other randomly, we could get some interesting, fresh perspectives, I guess. And but it's good to have the clarity that you give there of those two parallels, because those parallels are real.
Yeah.
But it also gets us reimagining what we thought was perhaps clearer and cleaner, like we were living real life, when actually perhaps even in that real we were playing. I mean, with past thoughts finding new presence, I suppose.
Oh.
Yeah. No, thank you. Really, really stimulating on a Saturday afternoon.
Saturday morning here. Yeah.
Great to hear you.
I actually have one question as well, guys. I'm just wondering, please take no offense on my comment on this. What would happen with the younger generation musicians who probably already born with all this kind of hyperculture? They're already born into it, and they're already kind of like growing up, possibly not being able to distinguish between the virtual and virtual digital or the virtual reality. So what do you think, what kind of art they're gonna make? And would this sense that art is promoting the ideas of tolerance, would it still be there or not?
That's what I just tried to answer in my second part in the end, Anatai, when I said it's really a question of music education, that there we don't focus on knowledge, we focus on these very basic and fundamental archaic aspects of music making between two people. And if we have done that and we have implemented this kind of experience of mutual responsibility in the musical process on that level to music students, I think they will automatically be able to differentiate these two different dimensions. But if we don't do it, then they really grow up with Spotify and the earplugs. And that's what I don't want to avoid it. I just want to present the alternative. And if they don't get the alternative, then it's dangerous for me. But the alternative is, once again, diversity is important, which we have to transport. And then everyone can decide for his or for himself or herself how to deal with these two different developments. Because as Bernard said, they will continue to be, and that is fine for me. I don't want to say one has to be extinguished or something like that. That would be also not tolerant. Yeah? I just want to have both. And then music education should give the chance to the pupils, just on a very low level, to experience this kind of humanity, this very basic humanity, this mutual responsibility in the musical process. And they need to know who is Beethoven and how many symphonies he has written. That's not important. You can read on Wikipedia if you want to know that. Yeah? But to know what music making means with just how sound fits together. There are so basic things which are today much more important than anything else.
I'm sure Professor Lansky has something to respond to this. So please, Bernard.
Dieter, I think that's exactly the point. I just wanted, I mean, exactly right. And that's what risked getting lost over the last 20 years, not over the last 20 weeks.
Yeah. Okay, agreed.
You're absolutely right. And then I just wanted to share that I was really pleased. I brought some 20-year-olds or 20-something-year-olds into a panel with me the other day. And one of them ended the presentation with the concept that all that matters is only connect. So he's quoting Forster, but this idea that connecting each other is the starting point for the music making. So the same point you're making, yeah. So I think with the strongest of the people, of those coming through, they feel their human identities more and more as it collides with some of these other issues. And it was interesting that they were reading things like The Magic Mountain during COVID. So that whole idea of going into the epic works and the deeper philosophies and so on with physical books. So there's hope is basically all I wanted to share. It's healthy to see.
Thank you.
Any more comments from?
Just one little thing, because Walter Benjamin was mentioned a while ago, and one of the impacts of modernity, which I remember also from Walter Benjamin, is that people will be into a state of temporal disorder. It seems rather gory, but it's not really that gory, because we're already into temporal disorder in a sense. We're talking here, we're present together here. One is in Europe, one is in Australia, I think, one is in Singapore. No, we are all together here despite the distances, and that's because of technology. And things are happening at present, and this notion of present is also very complex. That's one of the good things. But the things about temporal disorder, sometimes societies now can never tell between what is significant and what is hyperreal, and what is real, between what is significantly real and hyperreal, so that sometimes they glorify the hyperreal. One example would be the although it's also good, the Dolby Surround in movies in the 1990s and up to the early 2000s is so fantastic that they glorify the way by which technology has simulated reality and not reality itself. That's the greatest danger, in fact. And when we forget about reality in its right place.
Right. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Dieter. Thank you for really stimulating talk, and thank you for all on-spot panelists that you're joining in. So thank you, Christoph, Max, Professor Lansky, and everyone. Okay.